Hi, so today we're going to be looking at Sport England's Active Lives survey data for the latest release, which is November 2019 to November 2020. So when we look at inactivity levels, so this is those who do less than 30 minutes of physical activity a week, what we can see is that Greater Manchester consistently sees a higher rate of inactivity than is seen nationally. And since baseline, which is November 2015-16, inactivity has increased in Greater Manchester by 2.6%, whereas nationally it's increased by just 1.6%. But if we split the data at the November 2018-19 time point, so this is the last survey before COVID is likely to have impacted activity rates, what we can see is in that first part, so November 2015-16 through to November 2018-19, Greater Manchester was reducing inactivity at about 2.5 times the national rate. And then if we look at the other side, so the last 12 months, inactivity has increased at almost twice the national rate in Greater Manchester. So it's increased by 4.9% here compared to a 2.6% increase nationally. So this is showing that Greater Manchester does tend to see a greater degree of change than is seen nationally. Now, this doesn't really help us to understand the picture in great detail. So let's look at how inactivity rates are changing on a monthly basis. So in Greater Manchester, there's a spike in December. Now, we're unsure of the possible cause of this. We've looked into sort of weather, which is often a big impact on physical activity rates, but it wasn't a particularly cold or wet December, so it's unlikely to be that. So the exact cause is still a bit unknown. However, then what we see is inactivity rates start to climb in sort of mid-March time, which is when COVID came into play and was something that people became aware of and may have started restricting their activity habits and doing things a little bit differently. Now, we would have expected that as national restrictions end, inactivity rates would fall in Greater Manchester, as they did nationally. However, this isn't the case. Restrictions may have eased, but inactivity remained very high in Greater Manchester. And inactivity did not begin to fall until local restrictions came into play. So while that's unexpected, this may have been due to people working across the system, developing ways of enabling people to remain active despite restrictions, and people having the confidence that they could engage in sport and physical activity in a safe way despite these local restrictions. Then what we see is inactivity then begins to rise again as national restrictions come into play, and this mirrors the national pictures. But how different is this to a normal year? So if we have a look here, the yellow line is showing the last year's worth of active lives data, with the blue line representing an average of the previous 4 years. Now, what we can see is there is a real clear deviance from the norm from March onwards, and the scale of change is really quite apparent. Not only is it a really sustained increase in inactivity, but it is much higher than we would see on average. And it's not until the latter half of the year that we start getting into more normal inactivity rates, but then restrictions come into play again and it starts shooting back up.